Coming to you live from the third floor of the Rhode Island State House, my name is Dave Barber, and a segment we call Capitol Spotlight. We essentially put the spotlight on a member of the General Assembly and discuss some of the things they've been working on and find out its impact on you, the Rhode Island citizen. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome back a gentleman that we've had the pleasure of speaking to once before, the Honorable State Representative Greg Amore. Representative, it's great to see you.
Thanks, Dave. I'm happy to be here again.
You hit the ground running as a freshman member of the Rhode Island House, and you've been doing some work with some oral cancer medications and some legislations that deals with oral cancer medications. Can you tell our viewers about that?
Sure. It's an oral chemo parity bill, and 21 states are either in the process of legislating oral chemo parity or have already done so, including Massachusetts. And just the brief background on it, my wife battled breast cancer last year, and so I learned more about cancer than I ever wanted to know. And as I went through the process, I found that there were some gaps in the system. A family friend of mine sent me an article about Massachusetts passing an oral chemo parity bill. I read the bill, I did some research, I found that Rhode Island does not have oral chemo parity.
And why is that important? Why is there a necessity for this parity? I know Governor Deval Patrick has signed it, but why is this important?
Well, I think what it does is it has the insurance coverage keep up with the technology. More and more, I believe 25% of the chemo medications now are oral chemo medications, and they target the cancer cells directly. The traditional chemo is an IV chemo. I think we're all familiar with what that is, how devastating that is to all cells in the body. It's not targeted, that people have to lose a lot of time out of work, that they have to have surgery to have a port put in. All that stuff can be avoided in certain cases with an oral prescription. The problem is that intravenous chemotherapy is covered as a medical benefit, whereas oral chemotherapy is covered as a prescription drug benefit. And so there are some patients who just can't afford the oral chemotherapy.
It has to be very expensive, I would think.
Some is, and depending on the coverage that you have, it varies. But the bottom line is a lot of people are forced into the intravenous chemo, even though it might not be the most effective. It is much more devastating on the body, much more time consuming, but they can't afford the oral chemotherapy. And the financial impact, and every state that's dealt with this has done the studies on the premiums. And even with conservative estimates, it looks like about a 0.04% increase in premium. So it's nominal. And it's the direction we're going. Again, I think it's the idea that the coverage has to keep up with the technology, and more oral chemo is being administered as the best treatment for various types of cancer.
My question is, Representative, you indicated that cancer touched your family. Is this oral chemotherapy less invasive to the patient? Are the side effects less? Because we've all heard some of those horrific stories that people go through with the IV chemotherapy treatments. Is the oral regimen less invasive, less difficult on the patient?
By and large, it is. I can't speak for every oral chemo treatment, but by and large, it definitely is. Once again, the oral chemo, most of the oral chemo medications attack the cancer cells rather than all cells. It's a procedure. People have to take a day out of work to have their chemotherapy. Some people cannot work during chemotherapy depending on how their body reacts to it, their immune system. A lot of that is eliminated with the oral chemo, and more, and I think, I'm pretty sure the number is 25% of the new oncology drugs are oral chemo, and you know, the physicians are on board with this all around the country. It's just, again, it's a matter of the coverage catching up with the technology.
I remember in the late 80s my mother going through chemotherapy. It was an 8-hour proposition. She was literally at the hospital for 8 hours with an IV connected to her, and of course you know about all of those side effects. So this parity that will be created here in Rhode Island, I think, would be a very good thing. Do you have the votes?
We're working on it. It's been received very well. People read it and they say, well, that's a good bill. And I'm encouraged with the response. I'm encouraged by the fact that the American Cancer Society, the Leukemia Lymphoma of America Society are all on board with this. Oncologists, families who've been touched by this. It's one of those common sense bills that kind of has just seeped through the cracks. But as more and more states have it, and Connecticut and Massachusetts do, I think it becomes more palatable to everyone. everybody.
Well, and I think, Rep, by virtue of the fact that this has touched your family and you've gone through it, you're certainly going to be a good ambassador for the legislation, because you know how important it would have been to your wife, and that certainly gives you an advantage when you start talking the legislation up. I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it.
And of course, we could not do it without you. Thank you so much for watching. It's called Capital Spotlight. My name is Dave Barber.